Tonight, though, we're going to take a closer look at a public safety problem sparking outrage 2,000 miles away from Flint in Southern California's San Fernando Valley. The source of that outrage is a natural gas leak. The leak started 3 months ago in a damaged storage well in Aliso Canyon, about 25 miles northwest of Los Angeles. Methane gas is escaping from the well and blowing into the air that's taken in by residents of nearby Porter Ranch and other communities. Dozens of people have gotten sick and thousands of families have been forced to leave their homes. The leak is raising lots of questions about the company that owns the well, Southern California Gas Company, and its parent, Sempra Energy. The damaged well had no safety shutoff valve. The company says the valve is not required by law. Angry Porter Ranch residents want the entire facility in Aliso Canyon, which supplies gas to nearly 22 million customers, shut down. But instead, state regulators on Saturday ordered SoCalGas to close only the damaged well, establish a leak detection system, and conduct an independent health study. This is just the latest frustration for residents who complain that state officials took too long to react to an invisible threat that was first reported to them over 3 months ago on October the 23rd, 2015. They point out that it took until January 6th of this year for California Governor Jerry Brown to declare a state of emergency. And in addition to causing health problems, the leak is also disrupting lives. Jennifer London has the story.
Sam and Netta Monjo were supposed to be signing loan documents to buy the home of their dreams in Porter Ranch, California. Instead, they're packing and moving 30 minutes away.
It's very difficult. You know, when your 3-year-old turns around and says, "Mommy, I want to go home," every day, it's hard.
The Monjo family joins 12,000 other people forced to flee their homes to escape methane gas that's been leaking into the air since late October.
Our 13-year-old daughter, she's been sick as well and missed school and has a horrible cough.
Infrared cameras capture the plume, but don't be fooled by what you can't see with the naked eye. Enough gas has been leaking from SoCalGas's Aliso Canyon storage facility to fill the Empire State Building every day. And if you get close enough to the leak, you can hear it.
It sounds like a hell of a lot of gas escaping.
With no safety shutoff valve, the only way to stop the leak is to drill a relief well, and that's taking months. Congressman Sherman and other lawmakers took a tour of the facility, part of a show and tell highlighting the progress the gas company says it's making. But it also showed something else.
The people who put that well down were not intending that casing would be used to inject natural gas or to withdraw it. They were trying to extract oil in the 1950s. Now, in 2015 and 2016, SoCalGas relies on that old pipe, does not do the ultrasonic testing and the pressure testing that would have told them that there were anomalies in the pipe, does not replace the subsurface safety valve, and the regulators give their blessing to that whole package. Gee, what could go wrong?
Are you saying the regulators have been negligent?
I would say the regulators have accepted a very low standard of safety, and SoCal has only matched that low standard. Yes, they've been negligent.
SoCalGas has repeatedly said there is no basis for claims of negligence.
We operate with safety and we see to all of the regulations, and we're in total compliance.
If you say that the gas company is in total compliance, then it kind of begs the question of, are the regulations out of date?
As we move forward, we will be, as we have told the governor and all of the various agencies, working very closely with them to set up a framework on where do we go from here.
What is clear, communities have been displaced, 2 schools have been closed, and local businesses say they're struggling because customers have moved away.
Obviously, there's plenty of blame to go around from the largest natural gas leak in history.
And what do you plan to do? What do you personally plan to do?
Right now, we're trying to push SoCal and push the agencies, get relief from people and businesses from the Small Business Administration. There's a long list, but it's got to end with having regulations of natural gas storage facilities.
Al Jazeera wanted to speak with the state regulatory agency in charge of oil and gas, but we were told they would not participate in an on-camera interview. Instead, we received an email which says in part, "The Department of Conservation has no comment on any specific remarks made by Congressman Sherman and cannot offer an interview at this time. What we can say is that safety is our top priority at Porter Ranch." The statement went on to say the agency is issuing emergency regulations, such as inspections and testing, but those regulations are pending review and won't take effect until February. That's not good enough for the Monjos.
I don't trust anything they say. Can they guarantee that nothing's happened to our kids breathing this stuff for months and months? I'd like to get that in writing.
With no immediate relief in sight, residents say they are not only sick, they are tired of waiting, and they are taking their calls to shutter the entire storage facility all the way to Washington.
Stop the lies and stop the leaks! Shut it down, that's what we seek! Shut it down, that's what we seek!
Al Jazeera's Jennifer London joins us now from Los Angeles. And Jennifer, California regulators, as you've reported, met this past Saturday. They issued new restrictions regarding the gas leak. What was decided and what impact might the new restrictions have?
Well, state regulators ordered a number of new restrictions. Among the one that is getting the most attention is saying that once the leak is stopped on this compromised ruptured well, that well will have to be permanently shut down. And while that may sound like a small victory to some, the reality, David, is there are 114 other wells at the Aliso storage facility, and residents, lawmakers, environmental groups say they will not be happy until all of the wells, the entire facility, is shut down because they have safety concerns surrounding those other 114 wells.
Jennifer, in the setup piece, you mentioned drilling a relief well to help stop the leak. Why is that taking so long?
That is the question everyone is asking, David. Why is it taking months and months to stop the leak? And when I asked the gas company that question, they described drilling the relief well as a very complicated, a very precise process. For starters, they say they are drilling the relief well 1,500 feet, away from the ruptured well. Then they are drilling 8,500 feet down into the ground. From there, they will drill diagonally and try and intercept the ruptured well. This is a very precise operation, very complicated as they describe it. Once they are able to intercept the ruptured well, that is when they will begin pumping liquid, mud, other materials to eventually stop the leak. But that's one of the reasons why it's taking so long.
And certainly a costly process. And speaking of costs, SoCal is spending a lot of time and money trying to move the community out, but they claim there's no long-term damage or danger. Does this mean that once the gas is finally shut off, the residents can just move back?
Well, that kind of depends on each one of the residents' specific circumstances. So, for example, a family or an individual that's moved into a hotel to get some relief from the odors that they say are making them sick, that will be much easier for them to move back into their home when they feel it's safe. But a lot of families, like the Monjos featured in our story, they've signed short-term leases. Some have even signed long-term leases. So when they are told that it's safe to move back in, or when the families decide to move back in, they are going to have to work out those details regarding the lease that they have signed and committed to.
And as far as the value of real estate in the area, what's going on with that?
Well, we've heard a lot of anecdotal stories about house prices plummeting in the area. And in fact, we know that banks are no longer lending in the area. That's the reason that the family in our piece, why their house fell out of escrow, because they could no longer get a loan. And just this week, we learned, David, that one local realtor has filed a complaint in Los Angeles Superior Court seeking class action status. He says that because banks are not lending, it has, quote, destroyed his business. And you know, you have to wonder about the long-term desirability, if you will, of that area, because this is making national news. Everybody now knows that there is one of the largest natural gas storage facilities upwind, a mile away of 30,000 residents, thousands of homes, and people are wondering about what it will do to their real estate in the long term.
Al Jazeera's Jennifer London. Jennifer, some terrific reporting. Thank you. Next up, we will talk to one of the lawmakers who is promising to put a stop to disasters like this. The question is, what took so long? We've been talking about the Porter Ranch gas leak that has been spewing methane into California's air for more than 3 months. Last week, California Senator Fran Pavley introduced legislation that she says will make sure an accident like this never happens again. Senator Pavley joins us from Sacramento. First of all, your proposed legislation to address the Porter Ranch gas leak, you say that it will make sure an accident like this will never happen again. How are you sure of that?
Well, I suppose no one's ever completely sure between earthquakes and other uncertainties. But what we're trying to do is minimize the risk to the maximum extent possible. And
how do you do that?
Well, through a variety of strategies. We know one of these injection wells is leaking. That leak will eventually be stopped. The well will be permanently killed. But what I'm trying to do is make sure about 20 other wells that are also dated back to the early 1950s, whose structural integrity is questionable, will be carefully looked at, analyzed, not just by key regulatory departments here in the state of California, but by an independent reviewer. And if they can't operate safely, we're not going to experiment again on waiting until there is a gas leak. Instead, we will just close those down as well. So there are 115 wells at this particular location. One well is leaking, but there are about 20 other wells that are that same era.
But I want to ask you a question about that in just a second. But quickly, what is in this legislation to help the people who have already gotten sick or have seen their home values plummet?
What this would do is provide some assurances that they can move back into their homes, resume a relatively normal life. Regarding long-term health impacts, this legislation is requiring not only looking at the short-term impacts from mercaptan, that's the odorants used in methane, so that we know when it's leaking we can smell it and hopefully stop it. But we're also trying to look at the long-term impacts. We're requiring a really thorough review and monitoring these people that are been subjected not to a one-time occurrence, but up to 3 months, as you mentioned.
That's great that this legislation is going to force the health to be monitored, but there's nothing immediately, it sounds like, for the people who are sick, other than monitoring and perhaps figuring it out at a later date.
What they've been doing is, of course, most people have been under medical care. We've had a lot of scientists look at short-term impacts of mercaptan, which are like nosebleeds and nausea, certainly unacceptable. I feel very sorry for the family, especially with young children that might have more susceptibility to the smell in mercaptan. Those in and of themselves, short-term impacts. There's nothing that suggests there would be any long-term problems, but we don't know for sure. So what we're trying to do is look at the long-term impacts and address them. There hasn't been a preponderance of scientific medical review.
Fair point.
Regarding long-term impacts.
Fair point. But regarding what is acceptable and not acceptable, a number of people in your own community suggest that it is simply unacceptable that since this started spewing air in October, that it took until January the 11th for you and others to propose any legislation. What took so long?
Well, it took Southern California Gas several weeks to figure out that they couldn't stop the leak, which is particularly alarming. Another piece of legislation that I am authoring is a requirement that there be safety valves in place within a certain distance from homes. There were none in place at this time. So it's lessons learned. Closing down all the wells today will not stop that leak. That leak is, they're putting in a relief well. It's complicated. I'm not an expert on the details on this.
Well, and that is a perfectly fair point, that perhaps a lot of people were caught by surprise. But given that, as you pointed out, something like 48 of the 111 storage wells were originally drilled in 1953 or earlier, why didn't lawmakers address this infrastructure issue before something like this happened?
We are learning all over the state about deferred maintenance, whether it's LA's archaic and old water pipelines that have failed, or some pipelines in a gas line up in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're seeing all over this country lack of investment by local entities, cities and counties, for keeping up and maintaining their infrastructure as they age over time.
But with all
so
due
this
respect,
is a collective responsibility.
with all due respect, a number of lawmakers have known about that lack of investment in infrastructure spending for some time. So again, the question is, why has it taken you and other lawmakers so long to get a handle on this?
We continue to, through investigative hearings, bring in the Division of Oil and Gas and the PUC, carefully try to provide that oversight. It's incumbent upon all of us, yes, legislators, as well as local officials, the governor and his key agency people. It's a collective responsibility. And I want to also say long-term, I think we really need to look at, do we put homes and schools adjacent to producing oil and gas fields?
Well, that's another very good question.
That's a dangerous combination.
And that's a great question that I hope that you'll be asking. But here's one more question, and that is, it's been widely reported that SoCal's parent company spent more than $2.5 million on lobbying and financial political campaigns in California. Did that have an impact in forcing even members of your own party to look the other way at some of their infrastructure problems?
Well, you know, it's been interesting on this particular issue. Bipartisan support. I don't know of any legislature who's not supporting this package of legislation, because what's happened in Porter Ranch is unacceptable. So I've had some very good cooperation with other legislators. I myself don't have any and never have had ties to SoCal Gas or Sempra. I tried to the very best of my ability to monitor very carefully and shine a light on operations. And so we just went back into session 2 weeks ago. I spent 3 months working with the homeowners on the field. This is in my district. Now, after all the oversight and attending the meetings and hearings, I was ready, once the new year began, to introduce legislation, because what I'm worried about is when this one leak is stopped, the media and everyone else will not be paying attention to Porter Ranch. I will be, and that's why I've introduced legislation.
And good for you. Senator Fran Pavley, she represents the 27th District in California. Senator Pavley, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Coming up,